it's Luisa Lyons here from No Milk Like Mama's, lactation consultant and registered midwife. So a short session here with the basics of how to stop breastfeeding. So breastfeeding usually is stopping breastfeeding is a gradual process that happens as your baby becomes older as a young child. And so usually for most people it's quite a gradual process. So these tips apply to that, but occasionally it's needed to stop breastfeeding more abruptly. And I've supported several women with stopping breastfeeding in a short time frame when there's been a diagnosis of cancer and the mother needs to have chemotherapy, or if the mother has an illness and needs one of the very few drugs. Only about 1% of drugs are contraindicated generally, but occasionally that has been the case, and I've supported several mothers over the years to stop breastfeeding more quickly. So if you have the luxury of time, if you're not faced with an illness or a medication issue, the best way to do it is to go as slowly and as gently as possible, so that it's the least disruptive for you and your baby physically, but also mentally and emotionally, as you will get a drop in your hormones when you stop breastfeeding that can lead to a grief reaction and anxiety for some women, and even trigger postnatal depression for some women. So it's really important to be aware of this. And if you feel like anxiety and depression feelings are not abating after a couple of weeks when you're stopping breastfeeding, please do see your GP for some support. So in general, when you're trying to stop breastfeeding, think about why you want to do it. And again, thinking about journaling those reasons, talking through those reasons with trusted friends, relatives, partners. I highly recommend speaking to an IBCLC who can support you with this as well. But doing it as slowly as possible will protect you from the physical effects of stopping breastfeeding, such as engorgement and mastitis. And for some women who get recurrent blocked ducts when they're stopping breastfeeding, as I mentioned in the previous session on night weaning, you might want to think about taking a soya lecithin tablet or a sunflower lecithin supplement. So thinking about stopping when it feels right for you, and also really acknowledging those feelings that may come up rather than trying to suppress them, trying to vocalize them, both for you and your baby. So if your baby obviously is stopping having breastfeeds and they weren't naturally ready to do so, and they haven't chosen to stop of their own accord, then they may well be upset with this. So verbalizing those thoughts and feelings for your baby out loud can really help you as much as them, and they understand probably more than you think they do. So for example, if they're upset when you're not offering breastfeeds, saying, I can see you're really upset and I understand you want to breastfeed, but it's not time yet. So trying to explain not now but later, or if you have to completely stop, just saying, no, I'm sorry, we can't have a breastfeed, but let's do this instead, and using distraction techniques. So physically thinking about keeping your breasts drained, but also trying to suppress lactation. So trying to substitute a breastfeed for the new food, if you're substituting with food, every few days. So generally dropping one breastfeed about every 3 days is optimal in terms of a nice slow stop if you have the luxury of time. So if you're offering 9 breastfeeds in 24 hours on average, then for the first few days offering 8 breastfeeds, and the next 3 to 6 days offering 7 breastfeeds, and so on. And just seeing how your body reacts to that as well. Try to allow at least 3 days between dropping one breastfeed before trying to drop another breastfeed. Also trying to gradually lengthen the time between breastfeeds or between pumping sessions if you're pumping instead of breastfeeding, so that your breast stays fuller for longer, which will have a naturally suppressing effect as the feedback inhibitor of lactation, the whey protein in the milk, builds up, which tells your brain to down-regulate the milk production. If you're pumping, then trying to pump for less time each time you pump, as well as lengthening the interval between it. And that goes also for breastfeeds, so trying to shorten the duration of breastfeeds as well as the frequency. But again, the slower the better to protect you from mastitis. So thinking about things like distraction techniques for your baby. So often, or your toddler, often when you're stopping breastfeeding, your baby will not take this very well if they're not naturally ready to stop. So as well as the traditional advice that I tended to give women around wearing high neck tops and clothing that restricts babies' access to the breast, so sleeping in a polo neck, it can be really helpful, I found, with my own children, particularly my second child, when I stopped him breastfeeding at 3 because I'd had enough and he hadn't had enough and wanted to continue. So it was tricky, but it was doable. Was choosing a time when the weather was good so that we could go out the house a lot. So keeping yourself really busy, particularly if you've got toddlers, they're quite distractible. So spending lots of time out of the house, physically exhausting them. So lots of time at the park running around, lots of time going out to activities and walks, and trying to distract them. Because I found that once I got home and sat on the sofa, that was the trigger for them. So I didn't sit down very much while I was trying to stop breastfeeding and wore a lot of polo necks. So that can really help. Also verbalizing it, again, I said before that babies and toddlers understand a lot more than we think they do. So just explaining, mummy's really tired, or whatever you choose, or mummy's boobies are poorly. Some people choose to say that. Some people choose to put plasters on their nipples. They've found that effective. I've had feedback for that over the years, to explain in a way that the child understands that breastfeeding isn't possible, or that we'll have it later if you're stopping nice and slowly. So that again goes hand in hand really with the night weaning advice, but trying to think about doing it as slowly as possible. In terms of drugs to dry up your milk supply, the traditional drugs that we used to use for drying up milk supply, like bromocriptine and cabergoline, have been found to have quite worrying side effects and even increasing the risk of significant illnesses as well as severe depression. So we don't use those now, but there are some natural remedies that herbalists may recommend. I'm not a qualified herbalist, so I can't advise on them, but some people have found relief from that. So do contact an international board certified lactation consultant so that we can share relevant information for you depending on your stage of your baby's life and your stage of breastfeeding, and hopefully help you to come to stop breastfeeding in a way that is positive for you, with fond memories. And I do really recommend getting mementos of the last feed. A lot of people forget to do this and then wish they had, so getting a photograph or a video of that last feed, and perhaps even something like breast milk jewellery to really mark the occasion and really honour and celebrate your amazing achievement, whether you've breastfed for a day, a week, a month, a year, or 3 or 4 years, whatever you've managed to do. Really celebrating that for the incredible achievement that it is, and knowing that you can mother your baby and parent in other ways as well as breastfeeding. And just thinking about all the women that you know that haven't been able to breastfeed for whatever reason, or have chosen not to breastfeed, they're still wonderful mothers. So there are many other ways to parent your child and to mother your child other than breastfeeding, and bearing that in mind too, and being really kind to yourself.